I think that these info slides are a little misleading of the debate that's actually being had. I don't think that this is a debate on policy or procedural governance. Instead, I think that this is a debate on discourse. Greg Abbott probably doesn't actually want to secede from the U.S. or institute a greater level of formal independence and autonomy from the federal government beyond the autonomy that it is that state governments are already granted. I'll elaborate on this later, but just using the most valuable minute of my speech, I want to clarify, this is not a policy or a procedural governance debate. This is instead a debate about discourse and the ways in which people perceive Texas government, Greg Abbott, those sorts of things. I want to talk about why it is that the Texas government and Greg Abbott probably actually don't want a greater level of independence from the federal government first, then I'll talk about the whole thing about discourse. I think that red states, particularly Texas, are actually pretty reliant on federal government and federal subsidy to insulate themselves from their own policy failures. And I can think of at least 4 examples of this. The first is the privatization of public infrastructure stemming from a structural and conservative belief in the inefficiency of government. But also, like, the belief that it is that the free market is going to solve for inefficiency and it's going to always be fucking good and it's always going to be great. But this disregards the need for government intervention in instances where the free market incentives to optimize and reduce costs actually result in worse provision of goods and worse infrastructure. The most perfect example of this that I can currently think of is like the fucking power grid in Texas that recently failed because the temperatures got way too low. Structurally, the incentive for the people that were making those power lines is to produce something that would work given the standard range of temperatures that were like permissible and tolerated and common around the 18th and like 1980s and the 1990s. But as it is that climate change has become a thing and temperatures have changed as of late, like that policy, that power grid and that infrastructure no longer really works. And when it got too fucking cold in Texas, a bunch of Texans didn't have electricity anymore because the power grid that gave them froze out. They weren't able to access that anymore. The second thing that I can think of is insurance deregulation. And I think that this stems from a general, general idea that it is that government should intervene and institute people to be able to have to buy insurance because it is that people are going to according to their own discretion and their own levels of risk aversion, opt into insurance if it's something that it is that they actually need. The problem with this, though, is that insurance costs money, and generally speaking, people don't want to spend money. So regardless of what their actual levels of risk aversion are, many people are not in a position where it is that they're going to be able to spend on insurance, and it is you generally need to regulate it to ensure that it is that people have insurance, because otherwise they probably aren't going to do this. The most pertinent example of insurance that it is that I can think of is natural disaster insurance. Hurricane Katrina recently hit Texas, and a bunch of people were just fucked because it is that they didn't have insurance, and it is that their homes weren't insured, so they lost all of their possessions, they lost the entirety of their life work, not their life work, a lot of their wealth is probably tied up within their property, which got destroyed by the hurricane, and it is that they are all shit out of what I'm going to move on. Third thing that it is that I can think of is gun deregulation. When it is that you don't want to regulate the sale and purchase of guns, what it is to have is the increased proliferation of ranged and lethal weapons on the street. So it is that other, people are walking around with guns, and it is that you need some way to be able to address that, which is probably an increased police force or increased military force, but that's something that it is you require money for, which relates then to the fourth policy failure of the Texas government, which is a model of low taxation. When it is that you have all of these other things, you need money to be able to afford things like police on the ground to ensure that it is that dangerous people who have guns get shot down before they can hurt anyone. But if it is that you don't have a model of taxation that is able to generate enough revenue for this to be the case, then where the fuck are you going to get the money to have the police from? You're probably going to beg the fucking federal government and be like, yo, we need we need money so that it is that we can have a bunch of police officers show up to an elementary school and just stand outside while it is that people don't fucking do anything and people get shot. They're reliant on the federal government for this money. They don't actually want independence from it. They're reliant on the federal government for subsidy, also for the provision of infrastructure, things like charter schools, whatever. I'm at 4 minutes. I'm going to stop yapping and talk about discourse. Cool. I think what Greg Abbott actually wants to do is he wants to evoke the comparison of China and Taiwan to articulate a distinction between Texan problems and American problems. He wants to frame the government as being some overbearing and totalitarian communist state that was really going to fucking rile up conservatives and articulate the Texan government as the only one that has complete information and thus the only government that is in a position to prescribe what it is that should be done regarding these sorts of things. And there is some truth to Texan problems not being entirely the same as American problems. Texas is a southern border state that shares a border with Mexico, so it is that they have to deal with a lot of the immigration that comes in through there. If it is that they are trying to claim that it is that their immigration policy, which is right now setting up fucking wire on fences such that it is that children can't, people can't climb over the walls, also instituting buoys so that it is that immigrants literally fucking drown in the rivers that are nearby, because it is that they can't get over and cross those buoys. These are things that are resulting in ostensible and apparent humanitarian harm, but it is that they are refusing to, they're refusing to concede because I think they have pretty intrinsic and ingrained xenophobic views. They don't like Southerners. They don't like people from the South. Like, the way in which they are able to affirm their policy, their immigration policy, as the best is by saying, look, you guys don't know what the fuck you're talking about because this is our problem. And the fact that it is that you're trying to intervene means that it is that you are overstepping your jurisdiction. You're like China and we're like Taiwan. Before I continue, sure, I'll take questions.
So let me just get this OG case clear. 4 reasons why Texas relies on the federal government. Greg Abbott should point to the federal government and be like, hey, you guys are terrible, and alienate all the relationships that Texas has with the Fed.
Yeah, this is not going to fucking do anything. Like, this is a pure discredit. Look, if it is that Texas governors can go out and say that it is that Joe Biden is a fucking pedophile, like, I don't think that it isn't their... Like, I don't think that it isn't they much care because it is that the likelihood of retaliation is extremely fucking low. Like, no, I don't think that that's the case. Yeah. But also, like, at the point at which Texan problems can be properly articulated as Texan problems and not American problems, this also applies to problems that the rest of the states in America also face. Namely, the one that I'm thinking of right now is fucking abortion, because Texas has a very strict anti-abortion stance of you can't fucking abort at all, regardless of which stage of pregnancy it is that you are in, because it is that they have these religious fundamentalist views that it is that fetuses from the point of conception are considered human lives, and it is that they're willing to do things then, like criminalize people that are traveling out of state in order to pursue abortion. They're willing to do things like ensure that there's a woman who would literally fucking die if not for an abortion procedure. They are unable to receive that sort of life-attaining care. At the point at which they are able to properly articulate and frame Texan problems as being different from American problems, then the input of every other American state just doesn't apply as much because this is a uniquely different problem that affects Texas in a unique way, and your information and your input doesn't count because it is that we're the only ones that have complete information. We're the only ones that know what it is that we're talking about. Abbott sucks off, is reliant on the federal government, but he also wants to piss them off at the same time. Like, this is the definition of fucking American libertarianism. He's fiercely convinced of his own independence, but he doesn't realize that it is that he's really fucking reliant on the federal government. He doesn't actually want to alienate them. He just wants to make himself look like a free market gladiator. For those reasons, proud to propose.
I think the speaker for those remarks. Recording. Which might be okay up here.
Give me a sec.
Overestimated.
Understand where OG is coming from. Because I think they try and duck the actual problem in this debate, duck the actual question by making it about like federal funding for stuff. We'll engage with them by refuting their actual case, but we'll take this debate to where it actually should be. Why? For Texas and for Greg Abbott, if the feds actually accept this, it's a bad outcome. And why, if they don't accept it, it's still a bad outcome. So let's do some refutation first of all. The first thing we get is that like Texas is reliant on public funds. They don't want to lose that, and like this won't actually. Like, they're not going to actually try and leave in this form. Why is this problematic? Number one, because getting the feds upset, as Adam points out, is still problematic when it comes to actually losing funding. Why is this the case? Because Biden does not necessarily have to like invest federal funding in Texas. It's not a necessity of being president. In many cases, it's done with specific strings attached. You do it in certain cases if you get concessions from the state government. Getting them upset probably makes Biden not want to do that. But second of all, this is especially problematic because it makes Biden look weak. Being president and having his state basically threaten you, say they want to sort of leave the union to a certain extent, makes him look horrible, especially when he's trailing in the polls right now. He's not going to let that happen, and he's not going to count. And even if Biden perceives that as just a bluff, like OG somehow wants to take this debate to, his response to that bluff is not to make himself look weaker, but to actually crack down in Texas in some form, probably the financial methods they talk about. But thirdly, Texas is one of the few Republican states that actually isn't dependent on the feds. It's one of the few Republican states that actually provides money to other poor states. Texas is not actually dependent on the feds. It's not Alabama, with all due respect. The next thing they talk about is the question of whether Texan problems are different from American problems. I'll address this in my first constructive, which is about how Biden accepting this deal is still bad for Abbott, still bad for Texas, still bad for the U.S. Here's the question. This debate in Texas right now is not actually about sovereignty. Sovereignty is a symptom of Republicans being frustrated with the real issue, which is illegal immigration. That is to say, when you look at elections that have been fought about this issue, in 2016 and 2020, Trump was not saying the real issue is Texan sovereignty. He was saying it's a problem of illegal immigration. What that is to say is, at the state level, Abbott's real reason for going to this is at the point at which he feels the federal government is not allowing him to actually enforce illegal immigration. That's why sovereignty is brought up as a tool to achieve, a means to the end of stopping illegal immigration. What does that mean? It means two things. First of all, it means that the actual objective of Greg Abbott should be, and probably is, given this House is him, a Trump victory. He wants Trump to win because that solves the illegal immigration problem with actual federal enforcement of it, without all the consequences of like threatening to leave the union and start some sort of weird proxy civil war or being Hong Kong, whatever it is. So there are two parts. Number one, his goal is a Trump win. But number two, there's a balance between his Texan and US identity, which comes back to illegal immigration. Texas likes to think of itself as different, and yeah, they wear cowboy hats, they think they're still cowboys. To a certain extent, given that the problem is a US-wide problem, and given that Greg Abbott is a Republican who has long links to American conservatism, he has some sort of balance there. What does this mean? Why do we think that if Biden actually accepts this deal, it's still bad for getting a Trump victory, which we think is the actual goal of Greg Abbott? For a few reasons. Number one, it means that if Texas is actually like a Hong Kong-like situation, it's not voting in the Electoral College like Hong Kong. It is a separate democratic system. It's not participating in US elections. No. This is horrible because it means the Republicans are never going to win. Trump is never going to win. The feds will never actually enforce laws against illegal immigration because Texas is like a huge amount of electoral votes. That's first and foremost. Trump doesn't win if Abbott actually gets what he wants. But secondly, there's going to be huge party pressure on Abbott to not do this, to not actually commit to this. He doesn't want this to come up because it means the GOP federally is going to suffer tremendous pressure on him. His party is probably going to try and get him replaced with someone who is against illegal immigration but doesn't actually want Texas to leave because of the electoral consequences. But third of all, if his goal is a Trump victory, he doesn't want to shift the narrative from something that Trump is winning on, which is illegal immigration if you look at the polls, to something like sovereignty. Trump he's not focused on an issue that involves literally splitting up and demarcating different parts of the US. That looks horrible for him and the Republican Party. Abbott cares about the Republican Party because its objectives can only be achieved. He shares its objectives, and its objectives can be achieved by the federal government at the end of the day. The last thing is, if illegal immigration actually isn't solvable at all in a Republican sense, Abbott benefits so much more from being able to say it's a problem because of the Biden administration federally. In this deal, it becomes a problem that he's responsible for if he doesn't fix it. Why doesn't he fix it? Because illegal immigrants will probably now still come into Texas, especially as it grows economically. What does this look like? Instead of the Mexican border being the only issue with him, as we see in the status quo, he probably now has to deal with borders with other states who are not going to enforce their borders precisely because a lot of them are democratic states, like New Mexico, for instance. What this means is, given that we've characterized why Abbott cares more about illegal immigration and solving that, not about sovereignty, because he sees it as a means to achieve that, he is probably going to put his party first. He probably wants a Trump victory. That solves it. This makes the Trump victory harder. There's considerable pressure on him not to do that. That's why we think he's not. That's why Biden agreeing to this is not good. But why will the government not agree? I think this is important. They have to actually engage in this debate and give reasons why this is like a likely deal and why it's positive, not just this random stuff about subsidies, which don't actually happen. There are a few reasons the government won't agree. Number one, it's fundamentally against the union. Like, this is not debatable. This is something that you don't want to happen. No party wants to be seen as the one that is traitorous, that is allowing traitors to secede. Optically, it looks horrible, especially to Biden. But number two, like, if this happens, it sets a horrible precedent that if you have a fundamental disagreement with the execution of Supreme Court decisions, you can just leave. No party wants that. Republicans don't, which means they'll pressure Abbott because they don't want to have to deal with that if they're in power. And Biden certainly doesn't want a situation in which certain states can choose and threaten to leave, like Texas does if Texas succeeds, because that means like legislation by any president like Biden is going to be much harder to actually implement in real life. But the third reason why we think the government won't agree is because it'll cost massive support politically. Like, he has certain reasons to oppose it. When OG talks about how, like, people criticize Texas for having really restrictive abortion laws, I think what this looks like optically is that Biden is letting them get away with it because now they have their own like mini pseudo-state where they can do that without any pressure from the federal government, without any pressure from the actual people of America. At the end of the day, the actual problem that Abbott has identified is illegal immigration. Sovereignty is a means to get that. The actual means, the more effective means for all the reasons we've discussed, is a Trump victory, or a Republican Party victory, a party of which Abbott is part. At the point at which we've shown to you that a Republican victory is more likely if this doesn't happen, if this actually doesn't happen, we think we take this debate. Very proud to oppose.
Before I start my speech, if I do get knocked out this round, I'm really happy I got to debate here and get to semis. It was really, really fun. I get to debate against a lot of cool people. Cool. My speech is going to show you why we actually win. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, first thing, we want to go against the broad assumptions coming out from OO. Because one, they think that Abbott really cares about Trump getting this win. We think this is an actor motion, and we think that Abbott uniquely cares more about getting elected himself rather than Trump getting himself elected into office. But here's the further thing. Abbott probably doesn't really care about Republicans and Trump to win because of the large variation within the political party of the Republicans. Yes, Trump may be the front runner right now, but there's significant amount of Republicans even in the Senate and even in the House of Representatives that don't really want to connect with each other and don't really want to have the same sort of policies that Trump perhaps wants to push forward. That's why we've had this constant narrative around Republicans going against Trump, right? But furthermore, Trump tried to build a freaking wall, but this literally didn't happen, right? Texans are still getting tons of illegal immigration, so still, Texans don't believe that this is enough. Simon also shows why in status quo, there are enough barriers or significantly less bureaucratic slowdown to deal with this huge issue of immigration that OO wants to talk about, right? Also, look at the info slide. There is clearly slowdown from the large U.S. bureau to stop them from enacting all these harsher immigration policies that they so care about. So given that they don't give a shit about Trump winning, I think this largely takes out OO's case. What I'm going to try to do, I'll take you in a second, Adam, is the further implications around Texans and why we then don't think retaliation is a feasible case to run off of from CO. The first thing we want to say is we want to clarify that Texans in status quo really do want secession. They have not only just various different policies, but they also have something called the Texan nationalist movement, that has constantly tried to push themselves and get themselves seceded away from the United States. Because Texas had a huge history of secession since really early on with the War in Alamo and stuff, right? They had this major, they've continued to want to be seceded from the US because of all the reasons that Simon laid out to you, because they have various different degrees of opinions such as abortion, immigration, and stuff like that, that the general large feds don't agree upon, right? So how are we able to bridge all these ideas? Because I think even if Texans really want secession, realistically for the same mix that OO and potentially CO want to say of optical negativity, there's no chance that the US government actually lets them go, and it's more likely that the US government wants them to have any form of policy to support or back down in some form of way in order to not be seen as this dictatorial regime that is China that they constantly shit on, right? So this leads me to the important part of this implication. Why does Abbott, as a Republican, need to get more consolidation and support, and why is this a politically good move for him? The core group that supports these conservative views are Texan nationalist movements, right? With a current rising Democratic movement and Democratic increasing municipalities and also a lot of immigrants in Texas, there's a lot of people in Texas who are more interested in becoming a Democrat and voting for Democratic things and voting for a Democratic representative, right? So you probably want the Texas nationalist movement to go to the polls and vote for you, but also other of these Republicans that are really staunchly for Texan independent control because it's in their history. But in status quo, they've seen that Governor Abbott perhaps hasn't been doing all these things that they wanted them to do, which is why there's a unique rising Democratic movement that Abbott wants to go against. Why is this narrative enough to galvanize enough people to go and do these things? We feel that one, it shows you that you can do things with less bureaucratic issues and efficiency, but you're also able to do and give enough pressure towards the government to show that you yourself as a state are significantly strong. Maybe you don't get the objectives of the Texas nationalist movement, but on the very least you get some form of optimal change that uniquely benefits Texas as a whole. We think this is super important as well, because then in an actor motion, we ought care about how Abbott himself gains all these forms of power and stuff like that and remains in office because it's politically good for him. Let's talk about retaliation, and then I'll take Adam's POI. The retaliation issue is the big push from OO and CO is that these optical issues means that a lot of these governments will probably retaliate in financial ways. Here's the issue with this. I don't know how as a US government you can let US citizens die from Hurricane Katrina, not get homes and all these issues. It looks optically significantly worse if you just abandon them, and even after Hurricane Katrina, continue to give them all these sanctions that harm their ability to get back into the economy or even get back, like save lives, right? There's a principle and moral obligation from the US government to do all these things. But second, I just don't think the feds, like with Simon, all of Simon's stuff that just don't get rebutted is that feds just don't want to lose Texas because they lose a large amount of their infrastructure that they invested in it. They lose a large amount of the economy, and they also lose a huge working force of people that benefit them, right? And I think this is a unique part as to why feds just won't do all these things. They'd probably be more lenient to the immigration policy as a whole. But also this seems like a politically better stance because a lot of people are already anti-immigration. They'll probably hate Biden less if he's okay with doing these things and being okay with listening to a state rather than giving up a state as a whole and giving up on quote-unquote the American people when there's that unique comparison. Adam.
Look, this is assertive, but it's true. Abbott is a staunch supporter of Trump. If he wants to run, if your metric is he eventually wants to get in office, he's turning his back on the guy that he supported for 2 fucking terms. This seems crazy.
Bro, but like literally Biden, 1, got elected, so he didn't have a lot of power. But 2, I just don't know how much that matters in this point because we already shown you why Trump didn't do a lot for Texas at the end of the day. Maybe he is a staunch supporter. I'm not a US buff, but at the point in which he wants to galvanize your own political support and win by his own political riding, you should do something like care about yourself. This is not hard to believe. So, why do we believe that we're able to get all these changes without doing all the risky things that potentially O and CO want to push to us? And maybe CG wants to take the harder stance, the harder burden. I look forward to that. Anyways, I think like the thing is, Biden is likely to back down on these issues, and this is when you get the consolidation of like Texan votes for you as an individual. You get these votes because people see you as an actual supporter of Texan rights. You get this huge media comparison between you and like the US government and China, and because there's a huge movement and narrative around liberalism and like this this narrative that a lot of American people hate China, this is when you'll actually get other states also supporting you and all other conservative pundits on Fox News also talking about these issues. So this is what forces the narrative and forces the issue. Thanks.
OG says that Abbott cares about re-election and he cares about advancing his policy goals. This categorically does none, and also turns his back on Trump, which we will prove is important to Greg Abbott for many reasons. What do they tell you? They tell you Greg Abbott cares about re-election. Why is he far less likely to get re-elected if this happens? 4 reasons. First of all, immigration is hard to solve. Why is this important? First of all, they tell you it's hard to solve. They say there was a wall on the border with Mexico, and it didn't solve the issue. Furthermore, immigration, and this is just a fact of globalization, that globalization creates movement of people, that they come to the border, and that it is a fact of life. Immigration is very hard to counteract, but moreover, immigration is hard to counteract if you are a single state who has authority over it, because there are other states that, that do not change their policy. Immigrants can still come from there. Why is this important? Why does this matter for his re-election? Because right now, the optically, because if we want to talk about optics in this debate, right now optically, the idea is that the Biden administration is failing at illegal immigration. He gets that political win. He gets to say, look, the American government is so bad on illegal immigration, we're being flooded with illegal immigrants. This is his most popular policy. This is what he bases his popularity off of, that he can attack the federal government on this. Why is this bad? Why is it bad if he does this? Why is he less likely to get reelected? Because if the political impetus is on him then to solve it, and he can't solve it, he necessarily loses re-election because it's all his campaign stands on. It is all his popularity stands on. So this is incredibly bad for him. But furthermore, this would be an atrociously unpopular politic. Why? Because, okay, we're discussing it in debate land. This is an absurd idea. No one talks about this in mainstream politics. It would be seen as absurd. It would be seen as radical. And like, I'm gonna get into this in a bit, but Texas is not like made up of like these ultra-nationalist people. Like 48% of Texas are Democrats. Like this would not be popular. They would be seen as radical, and moderates would not vote for him. He would lose re-election. Thirdly, he would lose Republican support. Why is this important? Because Republicans have influence over Republican voters in Texas. Republicans also have fundraising ability. He's less able to do this. Vivek already told you why he loses Republican support, and it basically goes unchallenged. But one, this is like if it does happen, is going to make it much harder for Trump to win if the Electoral College does not count in Texas. But furthermore, it is not within it is not within the normal realm of Republican politics to put things just on sovereignty, which Trump is not in favor of, rather than on solving illegal immigration. Fourthly, Greg Abbott does care about Donald Trump. Why does he care about Donald Trump? First of all, he is an American, and he cares about America. He cares about illegal immigration, and he cares about what happens in other parts of America. Yes, his primary interest might be Texas, but it's absurd to say he just doesn't care about the rest of the union. He's fine with being seen as a secessionist. But secondly, it's very unpopular within the Republican Party to be against Trump. They say the party is fractured. The party is not fractured. Like 75% of Republicans, 75% of Republicans at worst approve of Trump, but by the actual election, it'll be a far higher number. So this makes him unpopular with Trump voters, who are his largest contingent. And so I think, but furthermore, and this is really important, why does Greg Abbott care about Donald Trump winning politically? Like, why is that good for him politically? No, not right now. And why is that less likely to happen, whether or not the federal government accepts this or not? Well, Donald Trump is able to politically take on every goal that Greg Abbott has. They are aligned on illegal immigration. If he just waits 2 years or whatever, a year, he will get his policy goals. He will get a Trump election. What happens here is, A, if you accept this and they become a separate entity from the United States politically, then you will lose the election if you're the Republicans. But even if they don't accept the deal, this would be so popular for Biden. Like, everyone in the United States outside of Texas would be like, who is this crazy Texas governor? And look at Joe Biden standing up to this guy. We gotta vote for him. Especially when Joe Biden's literal whole campaign is like, the Republicans want to secede from the union. They caused an insurrection. They are literally anti-union, I'm the president standing up for the union. This would be so politically popular for Joe Biden. It would be popular for him to antagonize Texas because they would be seen as radical, and Donald Trump would lose. He doesn't get his policy goals, but moreover, he doesn't get his policy goals, and on the flip, as I already said, the impetus optically is now on him to act on things that he actually cannot effectively change. I'll take the POI.
Read the motion again.
Closing.
Okay, sorry. Trump doesn't really care. He's chill with people who want white Christians to secede from the union. Why in the name of God is he going to be unfriend Greg just because some Texans want to secede?
Okay, a couple things. First of all, like, Donald Trump just does not take kindly to people who are unpolitically aligned with him. He doesn't care about white Christians, like, who are nationalists, because they are politically aligned with him. He cares if Greg Abbott wants to secede or cause a secessionist union movement, especially because it'll also likely see that other states have similar movements within them. So I think that this would it would just also be politically unpopular, which is bad for Trump. Go back to my point on how this would be popular for Biden. But how does this help Trump? How does this help Abbott? What do they tell you? They tell you that, well, Texas has a ton of nationalists, and this would be they would love him for this. First of all, maybe there are some, certainly not enough to win an election. But second of all, they already support him. So I don't actually understand what the political change is here. I don't understand what changes. What else? What else? They then tell you, and I think that this is, I don't know, but I think that this is going to be mirrored by closing, that the government is unlikely to do this. First of all, I want people to read the motion, because it says that the governor will not stand down until they do this. It's unclear, sorry, but it's unclear if you want to bang on your desk. You did not tell me what it actually looks like if he doesn't stand down. We tell you, at worst, that means political, actual military action on behalf of the United States, which is necessarily just going to be a huge catastrophic failure for Greg Abbott. He does not want to go to that. Or at worst, other financial penalties. If he's not standing down, he's not standing down, and if the government's unlikely to do it, as they said, then he will necessarily be punished for it. and I already proved I would be punished electorally either way, punished based on what he wants to actually implement in terms of immigration. They also tell you that the government will still help Texas. Why is this not true? Because as they admitted, if this is mostly about optics, and now Texas is like, oh, we're kind of independent, we kind of do our own thing, what is the political incentive for the government to be like, you know what, we'll still help out, we'll still do it out of the kindness of our hearts? No, Greg Abbott has placed the political impetus on himself to act. That is catastrophic for him when he cannot act, when he cannot institute change. So proud to oppose.
Thank the speaker.
Oji says that you just use this to frame how bad the Texas problem is under like a Chinese communist state. The problem there is that they don't explain why this is like not symmetrical at all, or why you can't do this on off. Specifically, they don't explain why you need to hold out on like protecting the razor wire. We're going to explain the actual missing mechanism under OG, which is why you get good discourse and backlash. Frame how that happens and how you're going to weaponize this. But just briefly, I just don't think any argument on the efficacy of a secessionary state is ever meaningful in this round. Insofar as like the feds are never going to fucking concede this because it is unconstitutional. You need to literally change the constitution. Biden also doesn't have unilateral control to make this decision. His incentives don't matter in this case. But also realistically, here's what you're actually going to do. The security is going to keep trying to take it down. You're just going to keep building it back up and use your little resources to like put up a fence again, right? It's not that crazy of like a thing to do. We're not saying that you're like holding out or not backing down. Literally just means you're just going to keep trying to put up this little wire and you're keep going to try to block other people from trying to take it down, right? But two, let me first frame like what your interests are before I explain the type of punishment that you're going to get and why this is good for you. First, I think you care about things like re-election and just potential presidency in the future. I think you want like popularity, specifically among right-wingers, i.e. you have to get through the primaries first, which means that if you are worried about Republican primaries, and here's the important way here, you need to be seen as like the absurd or radical sort of Republican to make it through the primaries in the first place, because it is a bunch of like Republicans who are voting within the primaries. They're probably going to be the most like extreme versions of that who are participating in deeply integrated into Republican politics in the first place. So you need to be the absurd radical one to get through there. Then you can moderate and appeal to like the broad American populace at large, right? What that then means is that you need to put all your efforts into this because it publicizes this and puts you into news, right? But why does this come across well to Texans, right? Because I think it's framed out of top half that you just have like a history, like culturally, of like independence and whatnot, and you have like a robust economy that's kind of like different from like the rest of the country and has seen quick growth, and you have cultural distinction, right? But the most important thing here is that the Republican branding is messaging that is about never backing down. It's literally you as David fighting literally fucking Goliath against corruption, against like the big institutions, right? You are the knight that is protecting these Texans from like the Mexicans that are trying to like kill them, right? Kind of like us, we're like Knepper's knights protecting her in this round. But the point is like you literally started this, right? You took the stance. And it is the worst possible thing you can do in this scenario is back down, because that means that you are literally giving up on the people within your state. You are giving up on the people, and you are letting the Mexicans infiltrate. And that is how this is perceived as for the literal people who are voting for you, right? The issue then is that this is literally the most cowardly thing you can do. But there's another harm that exists here, which is that this is an important news story that is covering up a shit ton of corruption that's going on within the Republican government that you're also trying to like make sure doesn't reach the light of day. I think these headlines are probably really good for you, right? But the second thing is here's how backlash is likely to happen and how it's likely to be good. You are weaponizing the victim narrative within this, because insofar as it's probably likely that you will get some degree of like Supreme Court backlash, it's unclear what this looks like or what this is even from top half. But I think what this probably looks like is, I don't know, they're going to sue your like government probably for all of the costs of like, I don't know, having to continually go back and like try to break down this wire and all of this shit, right? Which is something you probably like aren't allowed to do. The problem here is that, or the good thing here actually, the solution, is that the perception of literally getting sued for protecting the autonomy of your state to protect itself against invaders is a very good thing for you to be able to weaponize, right? Because the implication now is that they are literally taking tax money from people, the feds, for literally trying to be able to defend themselves against like illegal immigrants, right? And this is something that weaponizes your establishment and it weaponizes your like position within Republican Party, right? And I think it's really, really good, and this is probably the likely way that you're going to be punished insofar as like, insofar as I don't know, this is probably the way in which you punish like unconstitutional sort of like governments, right? But it is really, really good if the feds do like these sorts of actions, not just not the things that OO says that they're likely going to do, because you are probably not going to get sued personally, rather they're going to punish like the government of the state as a whole, right? And what that means is that you make this a kerfuffle. You don't back down. You stand true to your to your politics, to your ground, and you make sure that that is something that you're standing on. This appeals to the most right-wing sort of like sect that you need to attract in order to get through primaries in the first place. This is the people who will give you like power in the first place. These are the disproportionately crazy Republicans that you really, really want. Yes, you.
Look, the thing is, you're right. It's unconstitutional. You're fighting against the history of this nation and telling the nation has been wrong from the beginning. This is why you lose support. You're fighting against the Constitution and telling it's wrong.
Trump literally did that. Like, he literally like said the election was rigged, right? This is something that sells. This is also just like the way in which you're going to like I don't know. This is something you weaponize in like Republican like primary politics. Also, you can moderate much later down the line. I don't know why you need to like appeal to the broad general public right now. Okay, the second thing then is I'm just going to like extend the level of impact that we're reaching in terms of like what happens if you're actually able to like hold out and keep building this and like given like I don't know different like government structures and whatnot, right? One, I think it's probably likely that maybe Trump will win like the 2024 election. I think there's a bunch of reasons for this. I can give you one. The media plays like mental incompetencies of Biden. Two, there's a stronger loyal support base. He has like actual warriors. Three, there's just more money that you have from donors and shit. Four, just hyperinflation is generally blamed on Biden generally. Like five, just the polls and things like approval ratings. People don't necessarily trust Biden to be a strong figure. It's probably also framed, this election is particularly going to be framed as like a time of crisis for America, given that you have like wars with like Ukraine and Israel. What that means then is people are much more likely to trust strong figures, right? Why this is actually really, really good for you is because this fucking razor wire is not going to be the tipping point in like the Trump-Biden election, like OO wants to tell you. It's a fucking like a national like election that's not going to be what matters, right? But rather, what this is good for is in the instance that Trump wins, it is probably likely that he also aligns with you on the razor wire and is going to stop like like security from coming in and breaking it down all the time. And this looks really, really good for you if this happens, because this means that you have actually held out and beaten Goliath. Like you've literally been able to like fight against like the feds who are coming in and like destroying your fucking livelihood, right? And you've been able to hold out long enough to the point at which like you've been able to keep this like fence up, right? But the other thing is, even if Biden wins, and even if we have our worst case, it's probably just good that you're sending the message that you're going to keep rebuilding this. It's better for your optics and for your messaging to be able to adopt this messaging, because at the very least, you don't look weak, and that's the worst thing you can do. Proud of you.
Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think for Abbott to win this, he has to make sure to convince the people of Texas that this is legitimate enough for them to get rid of their constitutional roots and join the secessionist movement. I think opening government has this strange idea that secessionists are the majority of Texans. Secessionists are not the majority of Texans. majority of them are traditional Republicans who don't want to secede, who care about the Constitution, who listen to the normal brass of the Republican Party, and who toe the party line. I think if you can prove at the end of the day that the party is going to abandon you, I think these Republicans are also going to abandon you. So it's not just about Democrats not supporting you, but it's about the fact that majority of the Republicans in these areas are also traditionalists who don't want to secede. If structurally, if this were the case that everyone is secessionist, then Abbott would already have it on his ballot, have it in his mandate to have this as a as part of his platform. He doesn't clearly because it's not as popular. Abbott has been I think really the governor for a bit, and I don't think, yeah. So the thing he needs right now is to not lose support instead of gain support like OG wants to tell you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how we are going to make sure the party doesn't abandon us and how there is no path to victory for Abbott, and like a lot of stuff is going to be integrated into that. But before all of that, I want to talk about a tipping point. The tipping point is you need to kind of win this soon, because the motion states that you cannot let this go, which means that even if the party stops yapping about it, if the country stops yapping about it, and all the secessionists stop yapping about it, you, as Greg Abbott, cannot stop. And that means that if you keep talking about it and everyone stops, and the hype dies down, then you lose not only the respect from the people inside of this constituency, because the party doesn't care about you and thinks you're irrelevant, old guy who just yaps all the time, that your platform also becomes diluted because you can't focus on the other things and can't focus giving time on the other things. Why do you need to do this soon enough? And the soon enough is literally quite frankly like a year or something. This is true because the election is coming up and Republicans are impatient right now. This is important because the process to do this, when the Republicans hear that what you want is to create this entirely new system, that you have to make a like a Hong Kong or Macau-like state inside of the United States, they know that this is going to take a long time, which means that the process is going to take too long and you're going to have to go through that process in the middle of an election cycle. This does a couple of things and the Republicans know this. Number one, the party doesn't want to risk this because the party is at a good place with Trump. Literally, if Trump ran right now against Biden, he would win by 5 points, and the party knows this. Because the party knows this, they want to make sure they're not risking this with strange policies that might be that might not be like attractive to the rest of the Republican constituents, especially in the swing states who don't want you to secede like everyone believes it's secession, right? The second thing is they're taking away the hype from the Trump. Because this is such a big matter to talk about, what you do is instead of putting the focus on Trump, you start putting the focus on Greg Abbott, and Greg Abbott takes up time and space and media attention away from Trump, and the party does not want to do this. So at this point in time, what happens is the party doesn't put focus on what you want to do, and at the end of the day, probably just either lets you just die out, but you have to keep talking about it and you lose respect and support, or the party the rest of the party says that you're not good enough, that you're just a crazy guy. And this is important because the party is extremely important in Texas. They have a big influence. They own the state Congress. They basically own all state legislatures and everything. They give funding to Greg Abbott for re-election, and the party you will lose out on all of this because you are not as popular enough. So what all of this means is that at the end of the day, the party is not going to think that the party is not going to pay attention to you in their best case. In their worst case though, the party is going to think that you're taking attention away from Trump and they're going to abandon you, which means that the ability for you to get re-elected, as they say, it's already problematic, I guess they concede, is going to be even worse because you're not going to be part of the big press conferences that Trump is doing right now, because that is where the party hype, that is where the Fox News hype is going to live. So because you're cut out from all of these mechanisms of being able to access hype, and you're seen as someone fringe and taking attention away, you're not going to be able to access Texans, access support elsewhere, so you're not going to get this path, but also, you're not going to get this path. So you don't get Texas support because the secessionists are a minority, but also you don't get party support because this is not seen as that important. POI from opening.
The tension of the CO case is that Republicans simultaneously deeply care about the Constitution, but also literally have a frontrunner who is disqualified by the Constitution from running for the office of president.
Yeah, but that's not the point. The Republicans care about the media, the Republican voters care about the image that Trump puts forward. And the image that Trump puts forward is that he's Constitution first. Listen to literally any of his press conferences, and he says that he likes the Constitution, he respects the Second Amendment, he wants to make sure the Constitution is protected. That's why he's a Republican frontrunner, and that's what he talks about. The Constitution disqualifying him is seen as a democratic ploy to disqualify him, and that is why Republicans don't believe it. They believe that he's part of the Constitution. So at the end of the day, what all of this means is that this debate is not about Trump, it's about Greg Abbott and him not being able to be in the positions that he needs to be to gain the support of the party. So he's going to lose re-election, he's going to lose the respect, and what does Greg Abbott care about? He's at the end of his career, he's a traditional man who talks about respect and honor, he doesn't want to become irrelevant, and this is going to make him become irrelevant, just another old guy who just talks. He doesn't want another job after this because he has enough money, man's a millionaire. So TLDR is opening government saying that he needs more support is not correct. He needs to not lose support. OG says that the problem is they are going to leave the electoral college and the Republican Party is going to not give them support because they're going to lose votes in the electoral college, and that's their problem. I think this is a little uncharitable to the government side because they never said that just because you become two-party means that you lose support in the electoral college. What I told you is that because this is going to be portrayed in the media as secessionist, because they concede it's secessionist, because every other constitutional Republican out there who doesn't exist in Texas is going to call you secessionist, that's why you're going to be seen as secessionist and someone who has to be marginalized to make sure that at this tipping point in the election that you don't take away the hype from Trump and don't make their chances of winning lesser. That's why you're going to be disowned by the party, you're going to lose re-election, and that's bad for you. Lose respect, bad for you.
Non-verbally, please, so just don't interrupt. I'll probably call for you halfway through, but if you'd like, you can raise your hand. Am I good to begin, or should I wait for OG to return? The important part of this debate isn't the secessionism, it's the never backing down. Given the way in which narratives work, as Nimai explained, given how it is that most voters at this point in time, especially voters who are open to voting Republican, are typically low information, vote largely on the basis of vibes, on the basis of whether someone is a fighter or whether someone is a coward, whether someone stands up for their beliefs or whether someone's backed down at the first sign of resistance. There's very little importance to the policy specifics of whatever Greg Abbott is arguing for on our side. Sure, OG is right, he can appeal to any percentage of Texans that like this weird proposal, but I think that far more importantly is the fact that, as CO explains, on our side, you never back down. You keep building the razor wire no matter what the federal government does, even if they sue you, even if they defund you, because we explain to you why the backlash you receive is so useful for your re-election campaign, which note, you want to get re-elected. Greg Abbott has repeatedly said he fully intends to run in 2026. For that reason, we achieved the main aim that I think all teams in this round agree on Greg Abbott having, which is to say re-election. Note, in our absolute best case, because again, our normal case is that he never backs down, he gets all the benefits of seeming strong. In our absolute best case, if Trump wins, and then Trump allows Greg to keep up the fences, you get not only a refusal to back down, but also abject triumph. Victory over the feds. They back down, you won. That is even more good for your reputation. So when CEO says the whole Republican establishment is going to hate you for pushing for a policy that they disagree with, no, that is not the basis on which Republican voters or Republican politicians decide who they wish to associate with and who they wish to fund, who they wish to support in their campaigns. Vibes, vibes, vibes. All right, let's talk team by team, starting with OG. OG says that this is a good discourse because you can analogize the federal government to China and you can show that Texas has unique needs and wants like abortion. Problem is, you can do this on both sides. You can say, look at those fucking feds, they're just like China. I have no idea why you need the motion in order to engage in any of this stuff. Next, to say backlash won't happen. This was broadly speaking assertive, and I think it's probably true if Trump gets elected, and then we explain why actually in that circumstance it's really, really good for you. But I think if Biden gets elected and there is backlash, or in the backlash between now and Biden's election, this is really, really good for Greg for all the reasons we explained, why the court challenges and the news stories that emerge from this are going to be uniquely valuable for Greg Abbott to get reelected. I will expand on that later. Next, OG says that sort of you want bring Texan nationalists to the polls. The problem is, as both op teams have already pointed out, Texan nationalists are probably going to go to the general election polls already, and if Greg Abbott is the Republican candidate, they're probably going to vote for Greg Abbott on both sides. The key is who they vote for in the primary. That's uniquely how we were able to take it over our top half, because note, the prerequisite for winning the general is winning the primary. So if you think OG shows that you win the general, you first need to believe that you're going to win and to survive any realistic primary challenges that are put against you. You uniquely get that on our side, and on our side, uniquely over OG, you get a characterization of actually what the fuck continuing to not stand down meaningfully looks like. When OG says aspirationally, well, the feds will back down under Biden, I think for all the reasons OO has already given, this is possible but extraordinarily unlikely, because the precedent that it would set for Biden to just on a whim say, no, actually we don't care about supporting human rights. Never in a million years would Biden do that. I know that's a knife, but whatever. All right, let's talk OO. What does OO say? First, they say that if the feds accept, this is a bad thing. We've explained why this never in a million years is going to happen, not only because of the precedent sets, but all the reasons they gave, because it's basically unconstitutional. It would require enough state legislature majority votes that would require tons and tons of Democratic-controlled states to support Texas leaving the union. Never going to happen. Don't let this enter into your deliberation. Let's talk about their actual case. They say you're going to upset the Fed, you're going to lose funding. First, probably not going to happen. One, Biden's not a dictator. He doesn't have unilateral control over federal funding. Right now, funding is decided by compromise with the Republican-controlled House and the Senate and the presidency. And also, the Dems need Texan votes in the House and maybe in the future in the Senate. Texas is a broadly purple state. We've also already done the budget for this year. I have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. Even if there is backlash, whether it's funding, which is unlikely, or more realistically legal stuff, or other mechanisms that Biden can use via sort of presidential decrees and whatnot, this is good for Greg Abbott because this advances his victimhood narrative that the federal government is out to attack you, the Texan people. They're stealing your tax dollars via their lawsuits against your federal or against your state agencies. This is good then also for Republican House seats, which is something that the Republican Party, broadly speaking, would care about. Next, they talked about Trump winning and something mattering here. Also, big picture, one, I don't think this is going to affect whether or not Trump wins or not. No way it's the tipping point. Two, Greg Abbott is probably ambivalent about whether Trump or Biden wins, because sure, there's some benefits that happen if Trump wins, but if Biden wins, Greg Abbott can spend the next 2 years after 2024 railing against Biden and all the evils of socialism. That probably has some reputational benefits for him. Probably don't let this enter into your deliberation once again. Let's talk about the narrative, though. They say that it's bad to shift the narrative to sovereignty and that you don't want to show Biden being cool and standing up for American values. Narratives in American politics are really fucking dumb. What people actually see isn't all the nuance that is described on all of OpBench. It's the headline. It's the vibes, as I've already described. And so what you want to, the narrative of sovereignty and the narrative of immigration are not extricable in the way that they describe. No, they're bundled up together in a mumbo-jumbo nonsense that is American politics today. So this mumbo-jumbo nonsense narrative, you prefer to be fighting on that grounds rather than talking about abortion, which is currently a losing issue for Republicans. Texas separatism and Texan immigration are both sexy issues that can then distract from abortion and also from Texan corruption issues, the problems of the cold winter that killed a bunch of people, etc. The GOP won't be angry. All the outsiders in Texas, everyone knows that this is fluff, everyone knows that this is nonsense that he's engaging in. What they're going to prioritize is the immigration rather than the technical nitty-gritty constitutional nonsense that, as OG has already correctly pointed out, Republicans don't care that much about. Okay, great. I need to talk a lot more about a lot of things. All right, let's rapid fire through the rest of OO. They say immigration is hard to solve. This is true, but Republicans benefit from it as a perpetually unsolved problem. They say there's a political emphasis on Greg Abbott to solve immigration now. There's no delta here. Greg Abbott is going to blame the federal government no matter what happens for immigration. He's going to say they're preventing him from solving it on our side because they keep taking down his fucking fence. They say Greg is going to be seen as absurd and radical. This is necessary in order to win the Republican primary these days, given the composition of Republican primary voters. We explain that this has been a prerequisite for winning the general election, a prerequisite for everything else in the debate. You are not going to be aligning yourself against Trump. Trump knows this won't happen. Trump is not that crazy. Greg is being seen as radical, if anything, is a good thing for Trump because Trump can position himself as more moderate by comparison, which is something Trump is currently trying to do insofar as he's pivoting towards the general, trying to get the votes from people in the suburbs. Sorry for not taking me out.
If this is just about never backing down, why include this batshit policy that just feeds into Democratic narratives?
I think broadly speaking, it's good to say that there's some, because it wouldn't be backing down to accept Texan sovereignty over immigration, because in the world in which its policy passed, and Texas had the one state, two country solution, then Texas would be able to continue to keep the wires up. And so there's actually no world in which you'd ever be backing down even if you passed our policy. I know that's a nuanced response. Okay, great. Let's talk CO rapid fire. First, you say that you're going to be seen as eliminating your constitutional roots. The Constitution changes all the time. What you're pushing for is an amendment, so people who are strict constitutionalists won't really hate you. Amendments happen all the time. Next, they say you don't have, like, why isn't this on your platform already? Maybe because Greg Abbott is an irrational actor who's made a bad choice. I think maybe this would be good to have on his platform right now. They can't just say that Greg Abbott is doing something, therefore it's probably what's best. They say it'll fade into the background. If it does, then there's no real harm. They say it would take tons of time to do this election soon. The governor's election is in 2026. They say the Republican establishment is going to dislike you. Even if this is true, even if the absolute best case, saying fuck the RNC reliably gets cheers at Republican conventions or at Republican meetings and conferences, etc. This is probably a good thing to position yourself as an outsider. There's going to be minimal coverage of this outside Texas, so you're not going to piss off people outside. There's the idea that you're going to be seen as like away from Trump again. If this is a winning issue, it's going to be good for Republicans at large, and then many Republicans are going to get attention during the 2024 campaign. For all those reasons, he gets reelected. Boom.
3, 2, 1. Make America great again. I think it's a fucking good slogan. I think it's a good slogan because it taps into people's belief that history is always a great thing. It's the romantic idea. Perhaps the past is greater than what we have now. I think this is a foundational belief with unwavering support for the Constitution. The belief that it's a founding principle that determines everything that is good and everything that the United States ought to be. The nuance that is missed in this round entirely, and I think Nick really flippantly responds to this, is that the Constitution is such a powerful document within the narratives of Republicans, within the narrative of the United States, that yes, you can make an amendment, but making a change that accepts what is essentially seen as secession, what is essentially seen as leaving, is very fucking terrible because it concedes one of the primary principles of this document. It says that the United States was fundamentally wrong, that the reasons that we've defended and held our rights on for so long is really, really terrible. What I'm going to do in this whip is 3 things. 1, I'm going to recharacterize Abbott, and I'll explain our claims and contextualization of what Abbott was. 2, I'll deal with the, I think, batshit case that comes out from OG, and explain why CG also fails out for the same fucking reasons. And 3, I'll position ourselves against OO. Because what Abbott necessarily wants is probably right. One point he wants to live in politics. He wants to continue this. He's been in his career for 30, 40 years. He was a governor for 25, a lawyer for 10. He existed in this sphere for a long time. He values the legality and constitution and the process of these things. So it's important to note that this sort of shifting from a back down doesn't just represent you fighting for Texas and putting Texas rights against everything else. It also represents you as Abbott turning your back on values that you've held historically for your entire fucking life. And that's crazy. Like, it's an instant to imagine that this is something that's actively in your incentive, irrespective of the sorts of things that come out as like potential benefits that you ought to potentially gain for the state of Texas. But the secondary thing to say here is that the premise of CG, and I want to like be really clear here, is that you seem like you are backing down, so you can't back down. Do something fucking radical. Say that you're gonna do this whole one country, 2 states, one country, 2 system things. But the issue here is that you are escalating the claim. You're no longer backing down on this idea of border control. You're pushing that the Constitution is entirely incorrect, that you have to change this, you have to push back for this. And no, it's not like a fucking amendment. It's accepting that the previous wars, the struggles that are critical to the United States history were legitimate, that the idea of federation was wrong and illegitimate, and that we ought to fight for secession. This is fucking insane. Like, there is no world where you do this and don't face backlash. Like, even the most constitutional dick writers on the fucking planet. Like, absolutely deranged. Okay, let's talk about the nuance and then position ourselves in context of the round. Because the constitutional stuff is also really important to note that it's a huge thing if you're consistently pushing for this and fighting for this, that you have to like make actual trades for a demand, right? Because what Nick points out, which is actually very true, that these sorts of big constitutional amendments can't be decided by Biden, they can't be decided by one individual, they have to be decided by other governors and people that exist within policymaking in the US. This is correct. You know what this means? When Texas makes and negotiates with other states for whatever the fuck industries, they put this as something he cares about. They go, oh, no, you have to secede on this, you have to fight this. It becomes something that they put on the negotiating table, and that's pretty fucking bad. Because again, as they frame, and as all teams seem to relatively accept, other than OG for some reason, is that Texas is a relatively rich state, one that provides back, that has incentives for other states to want to buy into them anyways. So this means that this is now a chip they use by the motion, because he's never standing down on this, irrespective of what happens. And that's really bad for the way that you engage within deals on on the state level, and the way that you engage with firms and other actors and policymakers. Because it shouldn't be something that you don't back down on. I think it's really fucking radical. The other thing to say here is just characterizing the party really briefly, is that it traditionally emphasizes the strong unit. It traditionally emphasizes federal governance. It's a betrayal of these fundamental principles. It's also, I just don't think that the broader Texas electorate is like the way that they claim. I think Jonah is right to say that there are Democrats in Texas. It's not this wild, big secessionist state that actually cares about leaving. And I think what this means is this sort of radicalism isn't actually productive for you. So Nick tries to get away with this. Like, he tries to squirrel hold this right. He's like, no, actually, the Trumpies love it when the guy goes crazy and he goes all this radical stuff. But I think, in actuality, one of the largest drops in Trump's popularity are when he seems unconstitutional. When he pushes for the rigged election, which he at first gains support because it seems like he's vastly defending this constitution that seems to be betrayed by rigging the election. But then he loses support for things like keeping files at his home that seem to also betray the Constitution. So it's clear that this is a central issue that is critical to voters' minds. So it doesn't seem intuitive that just because you are radical, pushing for a crazy claim, you automatically capture these sorts of groups because clearly they have a vested interest in the Constitution, its perception, its uses, and how people value this sort of document. So what this means is that the margin of radicalism being a shifting point in people's voting status seems really fucking strange on their side of the house. I think at best, it alienates a lot of voters, right? It makes them think, wow, this guy is an anti-constitutionalist, even more so than Trump could ever be because of the way that these claims manifest. But at worst, all it does is it makes Abbott just another figure in Trump's cabinet and his big supporters. And I don't think this is a good thing, because if you want to manifest and engage necessarily with putting yourself in the best position, maybe run for election one day, to maybe get the seat and all of these sorts of things, you want to be someone who can both be critical of Trump and be with him when you need to. And yes, he's a staunch supporter of him. But what this means is he's playing his cards right. So don't put yourself in a situation where by the motion, you can never shift your hand and you're stuck in this one-size-fits-all solution. Let's do some extraneous math. OG, the problem is just very simple. Simon's case is 4 reasons why the federal government is so bad and they're so important and to keep Texas under safe. Simon then continues to give me incentive analysis for why you just dissuade and fuck over relationships. I think the POI already takes out the bulk of their case at the front. Elgin's case shift here is also very simple. Sorry, the shift from Elgin is the following. Elgin just goes ahead and goes, oh no, well maybe we're going to reach a tipping point, maybe we're going to galvanize the sort of nationalist movement. These sort of characterizations already beat them out, but I think the additional reasons that I gave before about the Constitution, because of Tom Bear, because of the timeline, all takes them out even further, puts OG out of the round. To CG, all the constitutional stuff that we talked about is another reason why they're out. I don't think it makes sense that you go so radical, that you go so hard. This is also, I think, the difference between OO and us, because I think what we do very distinctly is we actually explain why this is a tipping point issue for a lot of voters. The Constitution is something that made America great again. It's something that kept you in its mind. It's something that you value as a Republican, as a guy who cares about this party. It's something that you hold critical to your heart. You go to sleep, and maybe the Constitution is your figurative fucking baby, because the people love it and they die for it. We think betraying this is really fucking terrible. It's political suicide. It's suicide to your career that you've potentially held for your entirety of your mandate. This is a really terrible idea. Vote CS.